There are a lot of misconceptions that exist about technology, as nicely emphasised by this quote from IBM Chairman Watson. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. We know how much this has changed over time. So what we're going to look at in this section with links to our reading is thinking about gaming, some of the ideas that are present, some of the moral panics, and some of the realities of contemporary gaming. So I'm going to step out of frame. I'm going to provide you with some interesting information and some other links and clips that you can watch so that we can all talk about video games from a more authoritative perspective. I hope you find this useful. When we think about moral panics, video games are certainly an area where there is a lot of concern and often with a lack of evidence. So a couple of years ago, some moral panics that occurred were around Fortnite and Battle Royale, particularly with the idea of children playing the game and the impact it was having on them. So we've got an example here. Interesting to look at the YouTube response though, and perhaps a more informed take on the use of these technologies. And you might think about where you fall in this space of thinking about children playing games when they should actually play the games at the level that is recommended for them, and what you think is reasonable within this space. We know that there's a huge market for games, and certainly we see through things like E3 in the States or PAX, which is held in Victoria, both of them very big game conventions, the popularity and the culture that sits around gaming. It's a huge subculture and one that we increasingly see in the mainstream. So why do we play games? What do we get out of them? And how is this different with video or computer games? This is important to think about, particularly if you're looking at game design or if you're interested in reviewing games. There's also a link to some really useful information here from Statista, which can help you as you look at video games. This week's reading captures some key ideas around games, culture and technology, thinking about different types of gamers, so the core group, the casual gamers, and then the independent companies creating games, the independent game users too. This helps to illustrate how hardware shapes software use, and so we expect that different hardware is going to be used by different types of gamers, but for example things like the use of casual games as apps on mobile phones by casual gamers has led to different types of models of games and very much types that you can pick up and put down quickly. It also introduced some useful terms for production design, so particularly for people who are looking at creating games, you might think about things like the proof of concept, so that first early version of the game that helps us to understand the game works well, it has good playability. Things like freemium models, because one of the questions is how do we afford to create games and how do we afford to keep updating them? So often games are offered free and then the user is encouraged to purchase in-game to be able to help them move quickly through different levels and stages. And also playability, so that sense of enjoyment, that sense of different types of gameplay and what type of expectations we might have from different game genres. The reading looks closely at gamer culture and thinks about things like issues of gender, emerging trends, and critique of the media effects model, which is this idea essentially that the media, just like a hypodermic syringe, pushes ideas into people's brains and shapes their behaviour in particular ways. This has been strongly critiqued because of lack of evidence to be able to support it, and issues around finding control substances too, as the control subjects too, as the reading explains. It also introduces a really useful term, that of the uncanny valley. I've included a clip here you can connect with. And this is a term derived from robotics that describes the unease people feel when they encounter an almost human simulation. And that is important for certain types of gameplay and review. We can see how we both represent ourselves within gameplay spaces using avatars, and how gameplay then also bleeds over into real life contexts through things like cosplay, where people engage in costume play, dressing up as characters from their favourite games. The reading also looks closely at gamification and how that impacts on different industries like marketing and education, and thinks about the impact of social media and how that's changed gameplay too, how we expect more of this connection. So we're going to move on now to some interesting infographics, which is useful for people who might be thinking about creating an infographic, as well as just being a really quick and effective way of sharing information with others. So when we think about games in Australia, we can see that there's a large number of full-time employees in Australian game development studios. So obviously it's a small industry compared to other spaces, but there are a significant number of people working in it, and it makes a large amount of money. Games worldwide bring in more money than Hollywood and have for a number of years now. We can look at income that's generated. We can see where the different roles are. So particularly programmers is a key area of employment, then artists, and then things like management, admin and marketing. That a lot of the jobs are based on the East Coast, although there are some game development spaces within Adelaide, of course, and the type of challenges facing the industry. You can click on the link here for more detail. Now, perhaps it was a bit of a misconception that it's only young people that are using games, but let's start to look at some of the data. So this is from 2012, households with games. So 95% of homes in Australia with children under the age of 18 have a device for playing computer games, and 92% of households have games. However, as was identified in 2012, the average age of a gamer is 32, and the average age of Australians is 36 years. So non-gamers tend to be a bit older, but we've seen the average age of gamers has increased steadily as people have grown up with the technology. And most gamers are 18 years or older. This is some more recent data from the United States, and it's showing that broader spread of the age of gamers. So interesting to see that it's only 29% of responding video gamers were 18 to 35 years old, and it's spread over different age points. When we look at gender of gamers, by 2012, we can see that that's a fairly even split as well. And you can see by the graphs how that sort of moved up in terms of female gamers and dropped down a bit in terms of male gamers to be that more even split between the two. And this also works to bring in different genres of game and different types of storytelling that may appeal to different market segments. The average adult gamer has been playing for 12 years, so that's interesting to think about. And you can look at here the reasons gamers play video games. We might think about this for ourselves and what helps to motivate us to play games. And you might also think about this if you're interested in game design. What do you want people to be getting from the gameplay they're engaging with? Interestingly, if we look at this data from March 2018, all-time best-selling console games based on global unit sales, Wii Sports is actually top of the charts. And I have to admit that in recent times I've dug out my Wii and was looking at Wii Sports and the sports resort with dog frisbee, which is quite fun. So there's this really, the Wii was quite a novel console and still has really good has received good scores for best-selling console games because it was a multi-generational device and so interactive and cutting edge at the time. So interesting to look at that and reflect on it and think about the different games that sell. And you can also connect to the stats there for Steam and to look at what's most popular there. Thinking about gaming myths and realities, there are a lot of misconceptions about what gaming does to your brain. So there's actually a clip here that I'd recommend you watching to think about challenging some of those myths. And as Gabe Zickman notes, games actually work to make kids smarter. They work to increase fluid intelligence and encourage people to seek novelty and that type of interactivity and stimulation. They work to help people to challenge themselves. So gamification is very powerful in education for that reason, because it encourages people to learn, encourages people to think creatively and look to do things the hard way, as well as working to network and interact with others to achieve things collaboratively. And they lead to a constant and exponential increase in learning, which we see through the Flynn effect, which is intelligence rising over time, as is shown here. So I hope that that gives you some interesting information and some perhaps challenges to some of the misconceptions we might have about gaming.